Hey guys, and welcome back to the Life of Con. And today in this video is a very exciting video because we are going to be going through the Minnesota Vikings 2019 to 2020 schedule. So this is a very obviously early reaction to the schedule. It just came out a couple days ago. So this is pre-draft. I'm going to be making another reaction video to the schedule and making more predictions closer to when the year starts, because the draft is a very pivotal part of the year and how it's going to affect the teams, everything like that. There's going to be injuries and everything like that. So we're just going to get our first reactions to it. So the very first game we have in our schedule is at home against the Falcons. And this is going to be a really fun game to watch. Two good teams. The crowd's going to be crazy, as they always are, the very first game of the season. And this game is going to be very up in the air because the Falcons really didn't do that good last year, but they really could have. You know, they had so much potential last year, and they kind of wasted that potential. They didn't exactly use every resource they had. They didn't exactly perform to the ability that they were expected to, just like the Vikings, who were supposed to make it a ways into the playoffs last year and didn't even make it into the playoffs. So this is the big season for both of these teams for that reason, because both teams have something to prove. The Falcons, I can't remember their exact record last year, but they finished well below 500, I believe, and they really could have been a playoff team with the roster they have. So it's just one of those fluke years that you have to try and rebuild from. I'm not sure if they'll do that, but I do think that the Vikings will get a win at home. It's a very hard environment to play in at US Bank Stadium. The crowd is great. Every time I've gone there, it's just been shaking. It's really loud in there, and a very impressive stadium, very intimidating stadium to play in. So I think the Vikings can get this done at home. A lot of the Falcons' year is going to be determined by what Devontae Freeman can do. He's been struggling with a lot of injury stuff, especially last year. So we're just going to have to kind of wait this out and see what's going to happen with the Falcons. So next we have a early matchup like we did last year at the Packers. We played at the Packers exactly week 2 last year too. This is going to be a noon game, and it's at Lambeau Stadium. Last year, for those of you who don't remember, was the infamous game where the Vikings tied the game instead of winning it, when they should have won it with a field goal, but we had Daniel Carlson, who missed, I think, 3 field goals in that game. If we would have had that extra half game, we could have made the playoffs, I think. We would have made the playoffs because we would have had the advantage over the Eagles. So that was a very important half win that we should have gotten. But anyway, all the bitterness aside, I think this will be the first loss of the season for the Vikings. We're going to have some really hard road games this season, which I will get to later as we go down the line. But this is going to be a very tough game against the Packers, who are going to come back strong after a couple rough years. They've gotten some offensive linemen, I believe. I think they've bolstered up their defensive line too. So I think the Packers are going to come back strong again this year. As much as I hate to admit it, being a Vikings fan, I think that they are going to come back a lot stronger. I think this NFC North division is going to be crazy good. It's going to be probably the most competitive division in the league. So at a away game against the Packers in Lambeau Field, where it's just so tough to play, I'm going to give this early season matchup to the Packers, which puts the Vikings at 1-1. Next, we have what should be an easy game against the Raiders. I really want to go to this game because it's going to be really interesting seeing Antonio Brown for the first time in a Raiders jersey. It'll be only the 3rd game of the season, so there will be a lot that we still haven't seen from him. So I hope I can maybe get tickets to that game. It would be one of the top ones to go to on this list. There's a couple games that I think it's unfortunate that we have to play at home, because if we had the Raiders as a away game, we'd still be able to win, especially since they're leaving Oakland next year, so there's not going to be much turnout, I don't think. But anyway, all that aside, I think the Raiders are going to be a lot better with the addition of Antonio Brown, and they have a lot of draft picks. This team is going to be crazy good in these next, give it 3 or 4 years, and I think they're going to be a really amazing team, just like I predicted with the Browns. With all that time to rebuild, they're now going to be a really competitive team and probably make the playoffs this year. But anyway, it's going to be a couple more years for the Raiders, so I'm going to give them a loss. I'm going to give the Vikings a win on this one. And now for another tough game, right off the bat, Vikings at Bears. So usually when I pick these games, even in these last few years where the Bears had been bad, I would usually pick the Bears playing the Vikings when they're at Soldier Field, because the Vikings have done really bad at Soldier Field for a really long time. Actually, they've really struggled playing at Soldier Field for whatever reason that is. It is a pretty tough environment, but the Bears have a really tough defense this year, and our offensive line is not going to be able to contain Khalil Mack. No one can really contain Khalil Mack. I think our offensive line is really going to struggle against the Bears, even with the additions we've made. There's just going to be some teams that are going to be really tough against our offensive line, because it's not the best, as much as it will hopefully improve this season. But I think the Bears are going to take this one. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, and the Bears are really going to just not let us gain any ground. So the next game is Vikings at the Giants. Whether this is home or away, I think this is going to be a really easy game, because besides Saquon Barkley, the Giants really don't have much going for them right now. They're in like the deepest rebuild mode you can possibly be in. After trading away Odell Beckham Jr., they're really the only star player they had left, besides Saquon. So the Giants' full rebuild mode, we're going to prey on Eli Manning if he's still in there at this point in the season. It's just going to be a bad time for the Giants this year. They have a long ways to go before they're good again. So I'm going to give the Vikings a win on this one, which would make them 3-2 so far. And now for what's going to be a very good game, Vikings at home against the Eagles. So the Eagles just barely narrowly edged their way into the playoffs by not knocking us off themselves, but by us losing to the Bears and them beating the Redskins. So they barely made it into the playoffs and then upset the Bears. The Eagles usually get off to a pretty rough start and then surge their way forward. It's going to be interesting to see how Carson Wentz, makes it through this year. Will he stay healthy? Nick Foles is now no longer there, and to be honest, Nick Foles has been the better quarterback in Philadelphia these last couple of years. And it was the same thing with Case Keenum, where you got to think, like, he's been so struggling for so long, and now he's had 2 good years. I mean, it has to crash down eventually, and that's probably what the Philadelphia Eagles were thinking in this situation. So I do think Carson Wentz will be the better franchise quarterback, and that's why they had to get rid of Foles. And the Jaguars are very happy that they did make that decision. Hopefully he'll stay healthy, but it's just going to be hard to see. I'm going to give the Vikings this one, just because I think we're going to win most of our home games this season. It's just, again, a very difficult environment to play in. And I think it's going to be a very slow start to the season for the Eagles, just because, it always has been. It's been a slow starting for the last few years, because they just kind of pick up momentum and carry it into the playoffs as of late. And that's kind of the kind of team they are, just like the Blues in the NHL, like teams like that. They really prey off of momentum going into the playoffs, and you never see them get off to a really good start unless it comes crashing down later, like a couple years ago when that happened. But anyway, I'm going to give the Vikings that one, sending them to 4-2. Now moving on to a game at the Lions. So the Vikings have actually done pretty good at Ford Field. I'm pretty sure they've won more away games against the Lions than home games against the Lions in recent years, because the Lions always have the Vikings number when the Vikings are at home for some reason. I can't tell you why. but the Vikings have always done good at Ford Field, and the Lions just aren't. They're never the team that people hope they will be, and they never reach expectations. I just don't think they're going to reach the expectations again this year. They've always just kind of been there. They've never been really good or really bad. They've just always kind of been not good enough to make the playoffs. So I'm going to give the Vikings a win on this one, sending them to 5-2. Now we have a very exciting Thursday night game against the Redskins. This is a game I'm hoping to get tickets to, unless I get tickets to the Raiders one. But we'll see what happens. The Vikings-Raiders Thursday night game. The Vikings have never been a really good primetime team. Besides Stephon Diggs, he's always amazing in primetime. So this is going to be a very hard game to predict because the Redskins were without Alex Smith for most of the season. It was actually like first couple weeks that he got hurt, right? So it'll be hard to predict exactly how they're going to do. The Redskins actually almost made it to the playoffs last year. They made a run for it, and they got pretty close actually, even without Alex Smith, but their team was still a wreck without Alex Smith. They got kind of lucky. We still have yet to see a lot of Alex Smith in Washington because he got hurt so early. So it was a really hard game to predict, just based on that. So I'm going to have to go with the Vikings on this one just because of that uncertainty, and because, as I've mentioned 4 times before now, it's a really hard stadium to play in. So it'll be interesting to see how Alex Smith does, but overall I think the Vikings are the better team. So that will put them at 6-2, I believe. Moving on to Vikings at the Chiefs. Now this will be probably a loss for the Vikings on this one. The Chiefs are a very good team, an amazing team. Patrick Mahomes is going to make it past this really tough Vikings defense because he can pretty much make it past any defense. The Chiefs are just a really good team, and especially at home, they're going to beat the Vikings. So now on to the Vikings at the Cowboys, and this is going to be a very good primetime game again. As I've mentioned a couple times before, the Vikings have never been the best primetime team, but this is going to be a very highly contested game because the Cowboys are going to be a playoff contender. These last couple of years, they've kind of just been barely making it in. So it's going to be really interesting to see exactly what they can do. Dak Prescott is definitely getting a lot better, and I think this might be a breakout year for him. We'll have to see. I mean, he's broken out into the NFL, but this might be like a really good year for him, and we'll have to see if that happens. Cowboys Stadium is a very tough stadium to play in again, so I'm going to have to say that the Vikings are going to take a loss in this game. So that would put the Vikings at 6-4. But now we have a very easy game going into the bye. The Vikings are hosting the Broncos on November 17th. This is a noon game, and the Broncos still have a lot of work to do as they rebuild. Case Keenum, this will be a very good game because Case Keenum is coming back. It's going to be interesting to see how the fans receive him. With the whole Minneapolis Miracle Pass, him being the quarterback in that. So it's going to be really interesting to see that game, but I don't think Case Keenum is going to be doing too much against the Vikings defense, and the Broncos really have taken a step back from way back when they won the Super Bowl, like, 5 or 6 years now at this point. So I think the Vikings will easily win this game. That puts them at 7-4, and now for a very tough Monday night. Is it Monday night? Yeah, it's a Monday night matchup, Vikings at Seahawks, and this is going to be a really tough game. The Seahawks, it's just a rough stadium. It's a hard stadium to play in. The Vikings, I can't even remember the last time that the Vikings won a game at the Seahawks stadium, and I think they just have their number at home. So I'm going to give the Vikings another loss, putting them at 7-5. So 7-5 going into a matchup, Vikings at home against the Lions. This is going to be a tough game just because, as I've mentioned before, the Lions kind of have the Vikings number at US Bank Stadium these last couple years. I don't know why, but the Vikings did beat the Lions at home this last year. I think they're going to continue that. The Vikings stadium is increasingly getting harder to play in, so I'm going to give the Vikings this one against a kind of incapable Lions team at this point. So that's going to bring them to 8-5, and now for a rough game against the Chargers. Because it's just a mix of crowds at this point, there's really no home field advantage for the Chargers. So this will be kind of a neutral type game. But the Chargers are a very good team. I think they're going to be just as good at, this year as they were last year. Before Philip Rivers eventually retires, I'm hoping that they can make a playoff run and maybe even get a Super Bowl before Philip Rivers has to retire, because he is getting to that age. I think the Vikings are going to take a loss in this game. That would put them at 8-6 going into two very pivotal games. And this will be the Packers at home against the Vikings, and then the Bears at home against the Vikings. And this will probably be the two matchups that will determine whether or not the Vikings make it into the playoffs. So we have Packers at Vikings, and I think the Vikings should be able to stick out this game. You guys can check my stats on this one, but I'm fairly certain that the Vikings have not ever lost a home game so far against the Packers at US Bank Stadium. And I don't think they're going to start now, especially if this is going to be a very important game. And this is also a primetime game, which the Vikings have struggled in, as I've mentioned, but I think they will get this one done. And then we have a season-ending game, hopefully not season-ending, playoffs and everything like that, but the Vikings' regular season-ending game against the Bears. The Vikings have ended their season against the Bears, I think, the last 4 years in a row. It's kind of a tradition at this point to end it like this. And the Bears beat the Vikings at home last year to knock them out of the playoffs, but this year I think they'll stick out the win, just because, I really don't have any logic based on it, but I think that the Vikings should be able to win this game at home, as good as the Bears are going to be, again, as good as they were last season. But I do think that if a playoff berth is on the line, I think the Vikings are going to be better than last year. I think they should be able to get the win. So that puts the Vikings at, I think, a pretty reasonable 10-6 record. A lot of people are predicting the Vikings again to miss the playoffs, and honestly, with as good as this division is going to be next year, and as good as the NFC is going to be next year, because the NFC is really stacked right now, it's going to be interesting to see if 10-6 will even cut it for the playoffs, just because the NFC is going to be stacked. There's going to be a lot of really good teams contending, so we're going to have to see if 10-6 is even good enough to make the playoffs. But fingers crossed. Let me know in the comments your opinion of my predictions. Any criticism you have of it, I am welcome to hear it, because I know that might be too generous for some people and not generous enough for some people. But I think it's pretty middle of the road. I think there's a lot of factors that are going to be considered later that I can make a more accurate predictions of these games. I'll probably get more in depth with it on my podcast, because I want these YouTube videos to be a little shorter, even though this will be like a 20-minute video looking at my time on there. But with that, that is the end of today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please follow my Instagram. The link to that will be in the description. And as I've mentioned, please also follow my podcast. The link to that will be in the description. It's been a long time since I put stuff on there, but I do intend to put stuff on there a lot more now, and I'm going to try and get that YouTube channel up with my podcast too. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. For the reaction people that are watching this channel, please put the links in the description of things you want me to watch. Also, for the people here for sports, I welcome any sports reaction videos you want me to make too, because I love sports and I would love to react to anything you guys send to me. But thank you guys again. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you on the flip side.